So since I was trying to think of something Christmas related to talk about, and of course having started my theatre reviews, i.e. my Broadway baby reviews, I've tried to think of something that might relate to that. However, a few years ago, I remember I did a review of the stage adaptation of my all-time favourite movie, Edward Scissorhands. And, well, looking back on it, I may have been a little bit harsh on it. So I've decided to do a redo of this review. First off, let me just say that Edward Scissorhands is my personal all-time favourite movie, where talking about it is just not enough to express how amazing this film is. As many know, this is probably Tim Burton's most personal film to date, as it came from a very personal drawing he did when he was a teenager, living in the suburban town of Burbank. The movie was released in 1990, starring Johnny Depp, Winona Ryder, Diane Wiest, and was Vincent Price's last role. When it was released, it has grown to be, and I quote from a Radio Times review, "a masterpiece and one of the best fantasy films ever made." Rolling Stones stated when it was released that it's not perfect, it's better. Basically what I'm saying is, just watch Edward Scissorhands. Just watch it. So when I heard that there was a stage adaptation, I was intrigued. And after hearing it was a ballet, I was even more intrigued, as I thought this could work as an adaptation. The reason why I thought this was because the movie is very silent, especially as Edward hardly ever talks, and the lines he does say are very simple, which works as he is a creation and has not seen the outside world. Also, a lot of the film is quiet, as the most memorable moments have hardly any dialogue. You could tell the whole story with no dialogue, as well as the score, composed by Danny Elfman, could fit with ballet, as it has that fairy tale feeling, and many ballets are fairy tales. So I saw that there was a production in London during Christmas, so I got my ticket and had my chance to see it, and my first impression was... well, it was harsh. But here's the thing. Of course, going in, I know changes have to be made when adapting a film for the stage, so I knew it wasn't going to be exactly like the movie. And some changes were nice and fitted well for the stage, and a lot of the moments really did capture the spirit of the film, but others kinda missed the mark. I guess we should talk about the negative points first. Now, some are what you could say are nitpicks, like the comedy is sometimes a bit much. But I guess I have 3 main problems. First one is the way they portrayed Jim, the jock boyfriend who is a complete jerk, but while Jim in the movie was a complete asshole, he kind of slowly showed how much of one he was. At the start, he would just make fun of Edward and laugh, but as the movie continues, he kept revealing more reasons to hate him and how far he goes. In the stage show, he sort of reminds me of Stanley from A Streetcar Named Desire, from that sort of abusive relationship with Kim. It was a little too obvious. Although, to be fair, there is a scene where Kim is about to go off camping with her friends and Jim, and her father kind of has that sort of talk with Jim, like, now you kids don't do any funny business, and they're just like, yeah, whatever, and it's that was funny. That was funny. The second problem I have is when the town turns on Edward and things start to go downhill. Now, it's not the way they turn on him, but it's how sudden it all is. In the movie, Edward is caught by the police for breaking and entering, and even though Jim was the real culprit with Kim tagging along, Edward keeps this secret hidden. Not only does this start the downfall of Edward's and the Bog's respect from the neighbours, but once again shows Edward's kindness and his love for Kim. I mean, do I need to remind you of the quote? And yet things just keep getting worse for him. From his misunderstandings to the point where, as Peg quoted, maybe he should go back up there because at least there he's safe. Again, it's the gradual decrease that makes the audience feel the more for our main character, but also the joy that the only positive thing is the love Kim returns.
No matter how many times I've seen it, it always makes me cry.
In the show, during the Christmas party, there is a slight confrontation between Edward and Joyce's husband, blaming him for seducing his wife, even though we know that Joyce was the one trying to seduce Edward. And during this, he ends up accidentally cutting the wires on the Christmas tree, destroying the party. Now again, I don't have a problem with the scene because it does show the destructive nature of the Scissorhands, much like how in the movie Edward accidentally cuts both Kim and her little brother Kevin, so it shows the fear from the town. But I think accidentally hurting people, even though the audience knows that he was trying to help, even save Kevin, makes the misunderstandings even more tragic. I felt like the movie had a good enough reason for why Edward returns to the mansion on the hill. Again, maybe it's just because the movie gradually shows the downfall, which I think the show could have told.
But the worst part about the show is sadly a big one, especially for me, and that's the prologue and the inventor.
Again, I was excited because the flashbacks with the inventor in the movie are done so visually with hardly any dialogue, and yet the connection between him and Edward is very genuine. In the show, we do see Edward created as well as when he starts to live, which was very well done as it does create a sort of Frankenstein vibe, but with that fairy tale feeling the movie has. No, the biggest problem is how the inventor dies, leaving Edward unfinished. In the movie, the inventor shows Edward his hands and even treats them like a Christmas present, but suddenly dies of a heart attack. What makes this scene so tragic and what moves me to tears is that, 1, it's so sudden, and 2, there is no one to blame. There's nothing that could be done, and yet the fact that the connection between them was so strong and that Edward was so close to being complete. In the show, the death happens soon after Edward is born on Halloween night, and Jim and his mates go up to the mansion, plays a prank dressed as clowns, and this scares the inventor to death.
What the f-
So, yeah. Am I saying that this is a show that's not worth sitting through if you love the movie or haven't seen the movie? Well, no. There are very positive things about it. Like, the choreography for one thing was spectacular. I mean, I'm aware that Matthew Bourne is quite a big name in the world of ballet, and I can see why. He clearly knows how to tell a story through dance, whether if it's comic, tragic, romantic, suspenseful. So while I don't agree with some of the changes I mentioned before, the way they communicate was impressive, and when they do capture the spirit of the movie, it's all the more beautiful. In fact, talking about beauty, let's talk about the visuals. It really did look and feel like the movie. In fact, I would even argue that some moments in the show looks like something out of Tim Burton's own artwork. This would make sense, as Edward Scissorhands all started with a drawing. The world of suburbia in which Edward experiences, the town displays the pastel colours, and you can identify the characters such as Peg, Joyce, Esmeralda, and so on. It showed both the satire of suburbia as well as giving a fairy tale feel, expressing the emotion. While some scenes aren't exactly how the characters were from the film, the emotion was still there. For example, when Peg first comes across Edward is when he wanders down into the town himself. Now, I can't imagine Edward really wandering in as he would stay in the mansion, but the emotion of Peg's fear but sympathy for him is still there. Same goes for the romance between Edward and Kim. While I do feel the romance doesn't develop as well in the movie, in some cases it's quite sporadic in the show, but the moments they have are as touching. I don't think I need to say much about the ice dance, but that was the best scene in the show, as it exactly was how it was in the movie, but with theatrical dance, and Danny Elfman's score fits it perfectly.
At the end of the day, it's hard for me not to, pick all the little problems of the stage show because, well,
it is my favourite film. It's an extremely personal film to me. I cannot express just how amazing it is. To me, it is a masterpiece. I love every frame, every note of the score, just every emotion it brings. But I will say this.
I am glad I did see the stage adaptation, because it was interesting to see it in another medium, and it does seem to fit well for the most part. I shouldn't really complain too much, because at the end of the day, it does capture the main message and the same image of Edward Scissorhands. The feeling of the misunderstood.
To me, that's the beauty of Edward Scissorhands. It's a story, a character, an image that represents all of us at one point or another. And so any adaptation or any way of celebrating this wonderful creation is certainly welcomed. Thank you for watching, and Merry Christmas. Man, this thing reads like stereo instructions. Oh! Hello everyone, this is Alex, and well, I suppose this was inevitable.
In 1988, Tim Burton directed his second full-length film, Beetlejuice, which became the 10th highest-grossing film of the year, and since then has become a cult classic. Known for the quirky, weird, but visually stunning and hilarious fun, it put Tim Burton on the map, which helped him direct one of the biggest movies of the time, Batman. So with a popular but out-there movie, it was decided that The Ghost with the Most could work on stage as a musical. It started out as a pre-Broadway in 2018 at the National Theatre, Washington, D.C., and eventually moved to Broadway to perform at the Winter Garden in 2019, but was forced to close because, you know.
Now, after I did my review of the Edward Scissorhands ballet, I realised that I might have been a little bit nitpicky, considering it was an adaptation of a Tim Burton movie. So I tried to avoid doing Beetlejuice. However, considering I mainly focus on Tim Burton films and Broadway shows, it's showtime.
Well, it starts off pretty much the same, except for an opening ballad, and in this case, Beetlejuice sort of acts like the narrator, but fair enough. A married couple named Adam and Barbara Maitland working on their house die and become ghosts, except Beetlejuice comes in straight away to help them scare off the Dietzes, a family who have now purchased their house.
Huh. I thought you had to say Beetlejuice just 3 times to summon him. Oh, no. Now it has to be a living person to say it, and it needs to be 3 times in a row. Okay.
Oh, we're only at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the differences from the movie. One of the biggest changes is that Lydia has only recently lost her mother, Emily.
That can't be a coincidence.
This is what centers the entire character of Lydia, but trust me, we'll get back to her. All you have to know is that her mother's recent passing is what's caused her to become a goth, and so her father Charles hires Delia to be her life coach, but is secretly his lover.
I might need to put a pin in that.
Again, the story stays on track with Lydia discovering the Maitlands and being the only one who can see them. Beetlejuice trying to use Lydia to say his name 3 times but fails, and the whole Day-O dance scene is still pretty funny. Only this time it was Lydia's idea for this possession, and after it fails, she calls Beetlejuice and the two take over the house by throwing Charles and Delia out and the Maitlands to the attic. So, as Act 2 begins, we see Beetlejuice and Lydia enjoying scaring whoever comes to the house.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're just seeing a live-action version of Beetlejuice the animated series. Nope, apparently this is the plot now. Beetlejuice and Lydia are now best friends.
I'm not kidding. The second act feels more like an episode from the animated series, but still trying to tell the plot of the movie in pieces. We still have the seance scene, only this time it occurs as Lydia is trying to bring her mother back, and this makes Barbara go through the deaf for the dead.
Wait! You're telling me that Lydia is the one who performs the exorcism? Yeah, I can't keep up with the charade anymore. Let's talk about the character of Lydia Deetz, shall we?
Fair enough that you want the whole lost mother to establish the fact that Lydia would come to understand death, but it diminishes what was so great about her character in the movie. She was always the heart that grounded the film from all the weirdness that took place. Despite everyone around her thinking she's odd, she's the only one who can see the madness. The line, "Live people ignore the strange and unusual, I myself am strange and unusual." This really means that she looks deeper than others and therefore can truly understand. It's why her prized possession is a camera, as she captures and sees the world in her own way. It's why she can see the ghosts, but also understand that the Maitlands are lovely people. It's why she picked up the untrustworthiness of Beetlejuice and can see that during the seance the Maitlands are suffering. In the end, Adam and Barbara decide to let the Deetzes stay because of Lydia, and in return tries to save her when forced to marry Beetlejuice. In the musical, Lydia is the cause of pretty much all the misfortunes that happen, and it comes across as ignorant, self-centered, and not that interesting a character. And as far as making Beetlejuice more of a hero, oh yeah, at the end he defeats the real villain, the caseworker Juno.
Oh, you mean the woman who killed all the Martians when they invaded Earth? Yeah, that sounds like the bad guy, alright.
And then, having Beetlejuice say goodbye to all the characters as though this is the Wizard of Oz and peacefully goes to the Netherworld.
This is like if Edward Scissorhands came back down to the town and he and Kim just had a kid together. Hello? What Super Bowl ad? Who's Edgar? Wait, what? What? Show me the clip. I don't know how to feel about that.
It kind of removes what we love about Beetlejuice in the first place. The crazy, ill-mannered, perverted bioexorcist was a completely organic character. Even on the first day of shooting his scenes, they still weren't sure how he was going to end up as. Granted, Tim Burton had sketches wanting the black and white striped suit, and Michael Keaton wanted crazy hair, but once he was on set, it all just came together. By going completely nuts, especially when in contrast to the good-natured Maitlands, it made the audiences, well, enjoy their dark side. With this version, having a redemption and almost sympathetic side, it took away that insane creativeness of his character, and I don't think it established the times when he is acting like the bad guy.
Okay. Enough talk about characters. You all are probably thinking, well, if it's an adaptation of a Tim Burton movie, surely it looks great, huh? Well, you're not wrong there.
The main set piece is of course the Maitland house, going through 3 stages. First, the Maitlands as they're renovating, the second when the Deetzes move in, and third when Beetlejuice takes over. Another is the graveyard and the Netherworld, and instantly you can tell they took inspiration from Bo Welch's production design, which was heavily influenced by German expression, with the odd angles, misshapen walls, windows and furniture. It also took inspiration from, of course, the artwork of Tim Burton, down to the smallest detail. The hand-inked flowers on the wallpaper, a claymation-style hill as seen in The Nightmare Before Christmas, a tree of the dead from Sleepy Hollow, and even different character names engraved on the tombstones. It's clear they wanted to keep the style of a Tim Burton film.
Okay, so while it looks like a Tim Burton film, is it a Tim Burton film? Okay, despite what I've said about the characters, Beetlejuice is special.
It wasn't just Michael Keaton's performance that was improvised, it was honestly the whole movie to an extent. After Burton's first feature film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, he was sent cookie-cutter, story-focused scripts, but Michael McDowell's confusing, out-of-the-box script immediately caught his eye. Granted, it went through rewrites, changes of characters, change of tone, and even disagreements over the title with the studio. It is a very spontaneous project, as like the rest of his filmography, you can't fit it into one genre. At the end of the day, it's a Tim Burton movie.
Much like I said for the Edward Scissorhands ballet, it clearly shows a tribute to Tim Burton films, but I guess for someone like me it just comes off as an imitation. However, I will say this. I don't think Tim Burton himself would just want a plain old copy of the film. Much like the Edward Scissorhands ballet, he trusted Matthew Bourne to do his version of that story. And this is probably the same thing. At the end of the day, it's a celebration of his work, and it does introduce audiences to the work of Tim Burton. So, by all means, Broadway. Beetlejuice. 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 Hello everyone, this is Alex and welcome to Burton Land, where we discuss all things Tim Burton. And, you know, out of all the Tim Burton movies to adapt to a musical, Big Fish seems like the oddest choice, but at the same time, the perfect choice.
I've covered the stage adaptations of Edward Scissorhands the ballet and Beetlejuice the musical, and it's not like his other films can't suit the stage. Nightmare Before Christmas is a full-on musical, Corpse Bride has songs in them, and hell, he even adapted a well-known musical, Sweeney Todd, to the screen. But there's something about Big Fish that seemed unusual. Big Fish, a novel of mythic proportions written by Daniel Wallace, was adapted to film in 2003, and while it's not the most well-known or most talked about among Burton's filmography, the ones who have seen it argue it is one of his best among Edward Scissorhands or Ed Wood, and I can certainly see why. The story centres around the life of Edward Bloom and his estranged relationship with his son William. Throughout his childhood and well into his adult life, William is told stories of his father that seem very fantastical and not at all logical. Giants, witches, staying in bed for 3 years, a mysterious hidden town, and using his wedding ring to catch a big fish. Now, with his father on his deathbed, William is desperate to know who Edward Bloom really is. I think what makes this a particularly strong film for Burton is that it comes from his own experiences with his own father, Bill Burton. The filmmaker always felt estranged from both his parents, and in 2000 his father passed away. Coming across the screenplay for Big Fish, he thought it would be his way to express his personal emotions towards the passing of his father. It marked a change for him, as it was treading new territory, as while there were plenty of fantasy elements, there was a grounded reality with audiences were not used to with his films. Granted, there was Ed Wood, based on a real-life person, but let's say the character of Ed and the supporting cast weren't necessarily part of the grounded crowd. But that's a story for another time. The musical first appeared in 2013, but only lasted on Broadway for a few months. Eventually, it's been finding audiences overseas and seems to be coming out of hiding as years go by. I managed to see a production at Edinburgh's Fringe Festival, so I believe I may have seen an abridged version, so my review will be a take on that. So what may have appeared on Broadway, there may be a few differences. In all honesty, compared to the Edward Scissorhands ballet and Beetlejuice the musical, Big Fish seems the one that stays closest to the movie. But this is no surprising, as the book for the musical was written by the same person who did the screenplay for the movie, John August. But having that said, the way it was staged was pretty clever.
It may seem small, but I like how Senior Edward's bed was always on stage, so it felt like he was always there telling his stories as they play out. The limitation of the stage helped to make the story seem both small and intimate, but also that blurred line between reality and fiction. In fact, the most sets I saw, or at least the ones that had the most detail, were the places in the present time, whether in William's childhood room or Edward's private hospital room. It reminded me a lot of the Studio Ghibli film Only Yesterday, where the scenes in the present were crisp, clear animation, but the flashbacks had blurred backgrounds, as memories are never exactly as they were.
As far as the story elements are concerned, there are a few major differences between film and stage, so let's get into those.
Now, it's been a very long time since I've read the book, so I'm just going off of memory, but the first big difference I noticed was the story of the witch. In the movie, Edward and his friends as children try to get hold of a glass eye that belongs to a witch. This eye will reveal to whoever looks at it how they are going to die. Edward sees for himself, but doesn't tell a soul on how it happens, so in the present he just says that he knows, and this isn't the time. In the book, I cannot remember a witch specifically, but Edward does tell people he knows when he's going to die. The only connection we have to the witch character is from a landlady who had her glass eye stolen, but Edward gives it back to her and she frightens the thieves as revenge. However, in the musical, they bring back the idea of a witch, but instead of a glass eye, it's just a crystal bowl that is stolen, and it's just used to tell your future. It just so happens that Edward sees how he'll die, as he wants to know after giving the crystal ball back. This might be a nitpick, but I feel like it diminishes a bit of the mystical element from having a very specific item tell one specific event to something a little bit more generic.
Like, imagine hearing this story as a kid. Which one sounds more appealing to you? And then the children found themselves at the witch's house. This witch, apparently, kept a glass eye in her drawer. This eye, when you look into it, will tell you how you're gonna die. Or, and then the children approached the witch's house. This witch, apparently, kept a crystal ball that would tell you your future. The former does seem a little bit more unique, didn't it?
Second, while Edward does see the love of his life, Sandra Templeton, at the circus, like in the movie, in this one, Sandra is auditioning to run away with the circus, and as time stops, it's both that lock eyes. I like how this shows Sandra's slight desire to break out of her mundane life, which makes her seem like a good match for Edward, but then it doesn't make that much sense why she still ends up going to college and gets engaged to Don Price, who, if you remember, was Edward's rival in his childhood home of Ashton. But still, a really nice song, and so I'm okay with that little moment. The third one that I was most curious about going in was the story of Jenny Hill, as this is where the movie changed an element of the book that many thought was one of the best choices in the adaptation process. If you recall, Edward comes across a strange town called Spectre, where it seems peaceful, but no one ever leaves. The mayor's daughter, Jenny, befriends Edward, but when he is determined to leave, she asks him to promise to return to Spectre. Years and years later, Edward does return, but it is not the same, as the town was discovered by more and more people, and so capitalism took over, with most of the businesses going bankrupt. Edward ends up buying the town and tries to restore it, and comes across an older Jenny. After fixing her disheveled house, she tries to show her affection towards him, but he rejects her, stating that his wife is the only woman for him.
Well, in the book, he actually has an affair with Jenny. and even buys her a house and live together. So he pretty much does have that second life that Will was so afraid of in the film. So I was wondering which direction were they gonna go in the stage one? And kind of both?
In this version, Jenny was his high school sweetheart, and the town Edward saves is his childhood home Ashton, or at least saves the civilians as the town is to be flooded. So he buys acres of land to build a new town and a new house for Jenny. At first he falls for her affections, but then realizes his mistake and declares his love for his wife and leaves Jenny brokenhearted. However, this leads to the same reaction from William hearing this story, as he realizes that not only did his father truly love his mother, but also was a true hero saving an entire town, and that there may be some truth to his stories.
The last major difference, unfortunately, is a big one, and that is the ending of the story.
I'm not saying the ending was bad. It pretty much plays out like in the movie, where Edward asks William to tell him what the witch saw, i.e. how he was going to die. Will was never told this story, but tries to go along with it anyway and tells his father that they escape the hospital and arrive at the river where everyone in Edward's life is waiting. Don't get me wrong, it gets me emotional with a very bittersweet song of saying goodbye while celebrating his life, but I realised there was one thing missing, one small element that seemed to affect the whole scene. There was no big fish. If you recall, at the end of the scene in the movie, Edward becomes the big fish, as that was what he always was, with William finally understanding who his father really is.
In fact, now that I'm thinking of it, I don't even remember there being a big fish.
The only connection was a story of doing a certain dance that is the best bait to use while fishing. Again, this might be because I saw an abridged version, but even if it was, why cut that particular part, especially as it's the title of the story? This maybe is why I didn't get quite as emotional as I did with the movie. Now, that's not to say that there weren't any emotional moments. To me, the scenes that made me tearful was surrounding Edward and Sandra's relationship. There's a moving song called I Don't Need a Roof that Sandra sings as Edward is scared he's leaving her with so much left undone. It really speaks to anyone who has gone through the death of a partner, as you can see from both parties, and it really was the most realistic and grounded moment in the play. It was like the musical equivalent of Sandra saying her farewell to Edward in the hospital in the movie. It was simple, and that's all that it needs to be. The other was when Edward tries to meet Sandra at university after the circus. You might remember the grand gesture he makes, filling the whole area with Sandra's favourite flowers, daffodils. Of course, for a musical adaptation, there would be a song with this proclamation of love, but that's not what got me. As I mentioned, during the whole show, while the stories are happening, we see the older Edward lying in the hospital bed, observing the whole scene, being invested and remembering important parts of his life. While the song Daffodils is playing, the older Sandra is sitting next to Edward, and both actors start singing to both Sandras, handing them a bouquet of daffodils. As though the older couple are reenacting the moment they decided to be together for the rest of their lives. That was a beautiful way to show this scene on stage. This had the best blend of reality and fantasy that Big Fish excels at.
So in my opinion, I think it's a great adaptation. Is it flawless? No, but is it a musical that deserves more attention? Yes, I think so. Because the mixture of light and dark, reality and fantasy, there's always something that can tap into a member of the audience. Much like the movie, it's a celebration of life, and it does it in a way that can communicate to theatre audiences. So in my honest opinion, I think this is the best stage adaptation of a Tim Burton movie I've seen so far. Will there be any others in the future? Who knows? Only time will tell. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope to see you back in Burton Land soon. Take care.